The problem of loot boxes in video games has become an even bigger point of discussion in the past couple of years, as more countries are looking into bringing massive regulations to the practice. For far too long, AAA gaming companies have taken advantage of the rather lax and even outdated legislations to pursue bigger revenue gains at any means necessary. This led to a noticeable increase in predatory monetization schemes, blatant attempts at squeezing out the last few pennies out of the customers, and even gambling mechanics in games designed to be played clearly by children, all while the overall quality of the games being released have gone down significantly. This is something that a large portion of the gaming community has denounced for years at this point, and authorities all around the world are now finally starting to take notice. In Europe, for example, just last year we had Belgium and Netherlands already passing laws to regulate the practice, with companies like EA already being forced to turn off loot boxes for those regions. Well, fast forward to a couple of days back, and another country, specifically the UK, is also looking into regulating the practice of gambling in video games, with Digital Culture, Media and Sports Committee making an inquiry into Electronic Arts and Epic Games' practice of allowing loot box mechanics in their video games. Now, the inquiry, which you can see for yourself in the link down below, is roughly 3 or 4 hours long. I went through all of it, so you don't have to. I've seen the entirety of the discussion, and as you can imagine, both EA and Epic took a very defensive and hands-off stance through all of it. Various news media has already picked out some of the ridiculous remarks that were said during it, like for example EA's representative calling loot boxes surprise mechanics that are quote-unquote quite ethical in their view. But of course there's more than that, there's even more ridiculous statements throughout all of the discussion. But one thing that I really want to mention, and one thing that I really liked about the members of the committee who did this inquiry, is the fact that they did appear quite knowledgeable on the subject. Their questions were very candid, they cut really deep, and through all of this, they put both EA and Epic's representatives into a very tight spot. They were pretty much forced back into a corner, defend themselves as much as possible, because from all accounts and from what it looks like, it seems that UK is going to be the next country on the list that is going to start banning like microtransactions, or at the very least start regulating them in a much more severe form than ever before. And for good reason, because both of these companies keep dodging important questions, they keep dodging responsibility, and they were even trying to hide behind the veil of corporate/competitive secrets to not give any information about how they're collecting data about their users, how they are pursuing revenue and so on. And they constantly tried switching blame on the users themselves, in many cases even the parents. But what's most ridiculous is the fact that at some point they even tried shifting blame on Sony. So let's just dive into it, because it's quite ridiculous, it's quite fun to look at. And if you have any knowledge about legislation, about laws, about gambling and addiction in general, this is going to sound very ridiculous to you. Like everything that EA and Epic has said during that debate is pretty ridiculous. Anyway, for those of you who are not that knowledgeable, you first need to understand that there's a couple of reasons or root causes for why specific regulations needs to be set in place for the practice of loot boxes in video gaming. On one hand, loot boxes, loot crates and the whole slew of other terminologies used, by all intents and purposes behave very closely, if not exactly, like gambling, with instances where these mechanics even perfectly emulate what a reasonable person would expect to find in a casino, for example. This means that according to the overwhelming majority of the law systems in the world, companies that operate such activities, gambling and such, need to be licensed to practice this. This is both a legal obligation as well as a tax-related obligation, as revenue from gambling oftentimes fits distinct tax brackets compared to other forms of revenue. Basically what I'm saying is that if you're operating a gambling business and not paying Uncle Sam his proper share, well, you're pretty much done, you're cooked. On the other hand, along with carrying out gambling license, companies are also required by law to take preemptive measures to ensure that vulnerable categories of people don't get exposed to the practice or taken advantage of. This mostly refers to children, of course, so anyone who is not an adult, but other categories can also be restricted or verified by law, such as for example people with certain mental conditions. In this case, gambling companies also need to take special attention to them. This implies that the companies the gaming companies would be required to verify that each of their users who take part in this practice, who purchase microtransactions, who purchase loot boxes, also need to have this legal age of being over 18. This further means that these companies would have to take better measures at pretty much verifying user age, verifying that all of the information provided is legal and true, but we all know that there's no age verification because these practices oftentimes appear in games rated and even played by children. So a major point of the discussion was centered around what measures do these companies take to ensure that people don't gamble thousands of dollars away, especially children. For Epic and Fortnite specifically, this wasn't a big issue to begin with because we all know Fortnite doesn't really offer loot boxes. They offer microtransactions, but it's more of like a storefront where you know exactly what you're getting for the money you spend. EA, on the other hand, with their FIFA Ultimate Team, most definitely did. They also did so with other games they have. When asked about their stance on loot boxes encouraging gambling-like behavior in children, EA's VP had this interesting bit of information to give us.
Well, first, we don't call them loot boxes. I think that was
whatever term you wish to apply to them. Do you consider them ethical?
So what we look at as surprise mechanics. This is something people enjoy. They enjoy surprises, and so it's something that's been part of toys for years, whether it's Kinder Eggs or Hatchimals or LOL Surprise. We do think the way that we have implemented these kind of mechanics, and FIFA, of course, is our big one, our FIFA Ultimate Team and our packs, is actually quite ethical and quite fun.
Now the clip goes on for much longer than that, and EA's representative argues that in their so-called vision, surprise mechanics are quite ethical and they have no qualms with the way they are being implemented in their video games. I wouldn't expect anyone representing the interest of these companies to come out and straight out admit that they're in the wrong, as that would pretty much cost them probably billions or at least a lot of money. But you can deduce for yourselves how they are going to approach this entire problem, as in deflect up until the very last moment, not admit any fault whatsoever, no guilt whatsoever, and I think this perfectly shows why voting with our wallets isn't going to be enough to change this practice. Neither is complaining on the internet, neither is it going to be making petitions or arguing with the developers or with the companies that it's unethical and maybe even illegal what they're doing. There needs to be a government intervention to protect people against these practices. Moving on though, another major point of discussion was about the measures that these companies are taking in preventing user overspending and gaming addiction. It's undeniable that a big AAA company that makes a game in this day and age is looking into getting as many people as they can in their game and keep them in there for as long as possible. What this means is that there's going to be a continuous search for creating a form of addiction, because if you have people spending a lot of time in your game, this will also increase the chances for them to spend money in your game, especially so when you're making it so addictive, almost gambling-like, and so easy for them to spend that money. This was discussed in the context of the World Health Organization recently classifying gaming disorder as an illness, and while the WHO definition doesn't specifically say addiction in the text, it does pretty much define it as such, as in a pattern of gaming behavior characterized by impaired control over gaming, increased priority given to gaming over other activities to the extent that gaming takes precedence over other interests and daily activities, and continuation or escalation of gaming despite the occurrences of negative consequences. This is basically the textbook definition of addiction, something that even the committee members brought up, and surprise surprise, both EA and Epic deflected once more. In their view, their games aren't addictive, WHO doesn't know what they're talking about, and basically the companies are right and everybody else is wrong. Now normally I wouldn't go too hard on someone who says that addiction to anything is in part the user's responsibility as well. In most adult cases it is. It's undeniable. There is a form of culpability on your part if you get addicted to something. If you're an adult, you should have taken preemptive measures and informed decisions beforehand. But in this case, it's not just exclusively about adults, it's also referring to children, which are the overwhelming demographic that play these games. Furthermore, both companies tried dodging and shifting responsibility on the user himself, even the parents at some point, even on Sony if you can believe that. And furthermore, in their view, there's already enough stuff set in place to prevent addiction according to their view. On the PlayStation system, for example, the console gives user parental controls, and both EA and Epic mentioned how they encourage parents to set up limits to payments and playtime for their children, completely forgetting of course the fact that their games are available on multiple platforms, not just PlayStation, some even including mobile phones, and most of these don't always offer a form of parental control or limit. Neither has there ever been any form of encouragement, at least not from what I was able to see or gather, that informs parents to set these limits. Yes, a parent should always look out for what their child is doing, but it's not like they are prompted with these settings on the screen, it's not like they are not hidden in the settings somewhere in the panels, and it's not like the companies ever showed any interest in anything but creating a lot more revenue. There's a long discussion that can be had over here, and of course you can agree or disagree with it, but the fact still remains that there are laws in place, laws must be respected, and every other company that operates on gambling and other gambling practices needs to abide by this rule. There is absolutely no reason for AAA companies to not abide by these rules. There's no reason for there to be an exception for them. I believe at some point one of the Epic guys even tried shifting blame on Sony, mentioning that Sony are in charge with account creation and age verification, which is true in part, but only for the console usage, not for the actual game usage, as that is pretty much on game by game basis. So whenever you're playing a game, you kind of have to agree with some terms and conditions, sometimes even have to create an additional account for that, and Epic Games pretty much admitted that they don't have any age verification in place for this kind of stuff, for logging in the game, but even more importantly for making purchases. And again, as I've said, this only applies to one platform, which is the Sony PlayStation. There's still PC, Xbox and the mobile market left. Anyway, the reason I wanted to make this video was in the context of Anthem, BioWare and EA. These companies are constantly relying on users not having much say in their product's overall quality. And it's not just EA, it's most of the other AAA companies as well, which means it's becoming more and more acceptable to release unfinished or downright broken products, not only at full retail price, but also with the hopes of further monetizations down the line. Anthem is a prime example, despite failing miserably even at cash grabbing. Well, except its initial price, I'll give them that. They did do a massive cash grab with the initial price point of the game, but their further monetization from there was pretty much like non-existent. I don't think anyone is even buying anything from their cash shop. Now, from the stance I saw from the various UK MPs taking during the debate, I'm quite positive that UK is going to come up with their own set of rules and laws to regulate the practice of loot boxes and microtransactions in video games, and it's going to be quite stringent from the looks of it. They also appeared to know how to press with important issues and appear quite knowledgeable, so I'm going to give them that. It was quite a good debate to look at. But anyway, this has been all for now. What do you guys think about this? Comment your opinion down below. I'm really curious to see what's your stance on Epic's and EA's remarks on the subject. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate that notification button, and I will see you guys next time, so peace out.